Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah daf Membet. Don't forget to register for the Shiur. We're really getting very, very close. So today's daf is sponsored by Lenny Levin in loving memory of Carol Robinson. Carol was a vivacious, caring presence in our lives, whether near or far. Her aura lingers despite her passing. Her example will continue to inspire us to face our continuing life challenges with hope and courage. Okay, we're now going to finish up with our chapter and our topic of hanifa, of flattery, and how bad flattery is and all the things that it causes. So we learned that, or how one would get punished if one does it. So we saw 6 statements, by the way, they're all in the name of Rabbi Elazar. And this last one, which is number 4, anyone who's machnif l'chavero, sof nofel biyado. In the end, he will fall into the hands of the person that he or she flattered. And where do we learn this from? Yirmiyahu. I want to correct one thing I said yesterday. This is Yirmiyahu talking to Hananiah was before the destruction. Hananiah was referring to that God was going to bring back the kelim from the Beit HaMikdash, and he was going to bring back the people that had gone into exile from the time of Yehoiachin. If you remember, there was an earlier exile where the best of the people, the higher people of the more important, prominent people were taken already to exile. And he was saying that all God is going to bring back in 2 years, and that was a false prophecy. And to that, Yirmiyahu said, Amen, King Hashem, like God shall fulfill your word, which really he should have said, no, you're lying, right? Instead, he said, oh, I wish God will fulfill your word, but that's really, he should have called it as it is, which was a false prophecy. And because he more flattered him by saying, oh, I wish God would do what you said. So let's see what happens to Yirmiyahu. Uchtiv. Now getting to the first word on our daf. Vayihi hu b'shar binyamin. V'sham ba'al pkidot, u'shmo Yirmiyahu ben Shlemia ben Chananya, vayitpos et Yirmiyahu hanavi lemor, ela kastim ata nofel. So he's in the Shar Binyamin, Yirmiyahu, and there's this person whose name is Yirmiyahu. He was the son of Shlemia, who was the son of Hananiah. So if you remember, it said there, if you're a flatterer, you're going to fall in the hands of the person you flattered, or if not him, then his son. If not his son, then his grandson. And in fact, Yirmiyahu falls into the hands of Hananiah's grandson because he says to him, you're going to fall to the Kastim, which is the Babylonians. Vayom Yirmiyahu sheker. And then nofel Kastim, that's not true. I'm not going to fall into their hands. Uchtiv, and then what happens? Vayitpos, and it's missing the key words here, which is Vayitpos. You can look either in the Bach, who adds in the missing words, or you can look at the Torah, or where it quotes the pasuk. Vayitpos Yirmiyahu ben Shlemia b'Yirmiyahu vayivi'eu el hasarim, and then he brings them, he turns him in, and they end up bringing him and putting him into jail. So who's the one who does that? The grandson of Hananiah. So here you see it happening. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, statement number 5. And statement number 5 and 6 are going to talk about not individuals who are involved in flattery, but communities that are involved in flattery, where that's the mode of operation within the community. Call Eidah. An Eidah is a community, a congregation, maybe is a better word. Okay, a group of people, sheyesh b'chanufa, me'usa kinidar, despicable like a nida. This is a hard statement for us to swallow, that they use the statement of me'usa, despicable, together with a nida. Okay, but what do we really mean here? That a nida, a woman who's in nidash, when she's forbidden to her husband, people distance themselves from her, right? Particularly her husband has to distance himself from her. So that's what we mean by me'usa. It's a very harsh word. So the word nida, pointing out, Miriam, right, comes from nidoi, which is excommunication, right? Or nidoi comes from nidat, right? It's all the same root. So it's someone who we distance ourselves from. Shene'emal ki adat chanef galmud. The edah, a group of people who are chanefim, this is a pasuk, are galmud. Galmud really means someone who's alone, someone who's lonely. The way we would say it, kind of a nebuch person, right? But more than nebuch, they're really just alone and kind of like a sad person. So now, what does this have to do with the nidah? Well, they say shekem b'karchei hayam, which is always where you learn about languages on the water, in the cities that are near the water. Korim l'nidah galmuda. Okay, they call her that because she ends up being kind of set aside from everyone. My galmuda. Now, how do we get from galmuda to nida? So now they do a play on words, which is, we call it a notrikon, where we kind of darshan out the word. Gemula, and it's missing a word again, da mi ba'ala. Okay, galmuda, gemula, da mi ba'ala. Da means this, right? So this person is gemula mi ba'ala. She's, again, separated from her husband. That's how we get from galmuda to nida. So there we see the connection of the galmud and the pasuk to the chanef, and therefore we see someone who flatters is going to be distanced like a nida. Uktiv hatam, V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol eda sheyesh b'chanufa, last of the 6 statements of Rabbi Elazar. Any community or congregation that has chanufa, l'sof goleh, will in the end be exiled. K'tiv hacha ki adat chanef galmud. So again, they quote that same pasuk, and that's why both these are talking about edot, because the pasuk says eda chanef, right? We have an eda, a group of people who are chanefim. Uktiv hata, v'amarta bilvavcha mi yada li et ele, v'ani shchula v'galmuda. Here again, we're going to do kind of like Gzera Shabbat. It's not halachic Gzera Shabbat, but it says Galmud in the pasuk about the chanifim, about the flatterers, and then it says Am Shchula v'Galmuda, Gola v'Sura. So here you see the connection of Galmud and Galut, and exile, because it says Galmuda, Gola. Now we have a different statement about flattery and about some other bad things, and with this we will finish the chapter. Amar Rabbi Yomi Abar Abba Arba Kitot Emakablot Pnei Shechina. There's 4 groups of people. As for already talking about groups of people who flatter, it's a bad thing. Now we're going to talk about there's 4 groups of people that are not able to lekabel pnei shechina. They can't be at all in the presence of God. God wants nothing to do with them. Hatleitzim, these are lazy people who sit around all day doing nothing. Who are sometimes also involved in silly things. Kat chanefim, the flatterers. Kat shakarim, liars. Kat mesaprei lashon hara, those who speak lashon hara. Hatleitzim, okay, dichtiv. Okay, I see, Ruth, you're telling me it's also scoffers. Okay, so it could be who scoff. There's always different translations of leitzim, okay, in different contexts. But dichtiv mashach yado et lotzitzim. So this is God took his hand away from the lotzitzim. He doesn't want to be anywhere near them. Hat chanefim dichtiv kilo lefanav chanef yavo. Because before him a chanef will not come. So again, before God, no chanef will come because God won't be in their presence. Hat shakarim dichtiv dover shkarim lo yikon leneged einai, where it says anyone who speaks lies will not come forward before my eyes. And kat mesaprei lashon hara, this is the one that's the least clear. Ki lo el chafetz resha ata lo yigorcha ra tzaddik asher Hashem lo yigor b'migorcha ra. Okay, so God does not want resha. He will not dwell, right? Ra, bad, will not dwell among him. How do we get from here to mesaprei lashon hara? Well, this is a pasuk from Tehillim chapter 5, verse 5. And then in verse 10, it starts to talk about, I'll read it to you. It says, they don't have the right things to say with their mouths. It will be like an open grave, their throat, lishonam yachlikun, their tongues will cause them to slip. So this is obviously someone who sins with their tongue. What would that be? This would be lashon hara, by speaking, right? Lashon coming from the tongue, will speak bad. Okay, so there you have, these 4 people will not be invited to be in the presence of God ever. Hadran elu ne'emarim. And with that, we start the 8th chapter. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the 7th chapter, but I'll remind you, which is the 7th chapter started out with this big, long Mishna that talked about all sorts of ceremonies that were done. And it was all this distinction between which ones have to be said can be said in any language, or maybe even need to be said in a language that's understood. And that was, right, the Sotah, if you remember, that's how we got there. And from there, we went off on a whole list of ceremonies that can be said in any language, and then ceremonies that have to be said in Hebrew. And now we're just continuing. I told you that would take us to the end of the Masechet. We're continuing with the ceremonies. We're now already up to the ceremonies that have to be said in Hebrew. We've already done some of them. Now we're going to talk about the next one, which is Meshuach Milchama. And Meshuach Milchama, I'll read you this section in the Torah. It's in Devarim chapter 20, verses 1 to 9. Okay, when you go out to war against your enemy, and then you see they have all these infantry. Don't be scared of them. God will be with you. He took you out of Egypt. He's going to be with you in war. Now, when you get close to the war, I want you to pay close attention to these psukim because we're going to darshan them a lot. As you're getting close to going out to war, v'nigash a kohen comes. It doesn't say anything about a meshuach milchama. We'll talk about this later. The kohen comes, the kohen, we don't know what kohen, v'diber ala'am, and he speaks to the people. He says to them the following, Shema Yisrael, which is interesting, right? They use the language of Shema Yisrael, but really, literally, it just means hear Israel. Hey, listen to me. Kind of pay attention, I'm speaking. But soon we're going to darshan that. You're getting close to war against your enemy. 4 different languages, we'll darshan this also, of don't be scared. Okay, don't be scared of your enemy. Why? It's familiar, we say this in the bracha for tzahal. And right, I see you're answering amen, right? We're so used to hearing this, but and we say amen. So God is the one who goes out before you, out to battle, to save you. And you don't go to war alone. You have God behind you. And then the shotrim, which literally means policemen, but here we don't mean policemen, we mean a certain group of leaders of the people, say, Lemo, Mia Isha Sharbana Bayit, who's the person who built a house and didn't yet live in it. So you get to go home. Someone who just made a vineyard, planted a vineyard, and didn't get to enjoy it yet, should go home. Who betrothed a woman, didn't get to yet, didn't marry her yet, can go home. And then it says, okay, I see you're giving me a better translation, officers. Okay, the shotrim, the officers, then continue to speak to the people and say, anyone who's scared can go home. Okay, so first of all, notice it's shotrim talking to the people. Now, we always think, or at least if you've learned this before, it's the kohen who says this speech. And we're going to see that inside also, which is interesting because according to there, it says the officers, the shotrim do it, but really it's the kohen who does it. So we're going to have to figure out why do they call them shotrim. That's another thing we're going to darshan today. And notice the speech is split into two. One is, don't be scared, God is with you. The other is, there's 4 categories of people that don't have to go out to war. By the way, this is only what we call mechemet reshut, not a mechemet mitzvah. Mechemet mitzvah is when you're obligated, let's say, to conquer the land. That is an obligation. Everybody has to go. Even the women and the men have to go out and fight. It's an interesting whole thing. What do you mean the women fighting? Anyway, there's a whole thing there. We're not going to get into that now. But this is talking about a mechemet reshut, which you'll see they're going to talk about when they get to the border of Israel as they're leaving the country to go to war. We're going to talk about that. So obviously they're leaving Israel. It's not the country of Israel where we're actually commanded to conquer. And there seems to be 2 speeches, not 1 big speech. Anyway, we'll talk about all these things. So the Mishna starts off. So when he speaks, so already he's called the Mashuach Milchama, which means this is a kohen who was anointed specifically for the speech. That's what his job is. He's the guy who gives the pep talk before they go out to war and tells everybody the details of, don't be scared and who's exempt. He would speak in Hebrew only, as it says. So first of all, it says, right, the kohen goes to speak. So that refers to the one who was anointed for this. Soon the Gemara is going to say, how do you get from diber, he spoke, how do you know he has to speak only in Hebrew? The Gemara will have to help us with that because the Mishna does it. And he says to them, Shema Yisrael, al oivechem. Notice he says, you're about to go to war against your enemies. Who do we go to war to if not our enemies, right? Seems like a redundant word. Lo al achechem. So he's saying, this is not for civil war. Okay, civil war is different. They don't need this type of pep talk. Why not? Right? Lo Yehuda al Shimon, v'lo Shimon al Binyamin. Like, for example, not a case where Yehuda is fighting with Shimon or Shimon is fighting with Binyamin. Why specifically that example? I don't know. It makes me think of the Yosef story when Yehuda, went out to bat for Binyamin when they took Shimon as captive. But anyway, not when there's some civil war. Because civil war, as bad as civil war can be, in the end, they're going to have mercy on you if they capture you. They now bring an example of a civil war. They bring an example from Achaz Melech Yehuda fought against Pekach ben Remaliah, the king of Israel. It was a big war. And what happened? The people in Yehuda became captives of the people of Israel. And it says, so they took these people captive, but then they gave them clothes from the booty that they took. They gave them clothes, they gave them shoes, they fed them. Vayashkum, they gave them drinks. Vayasichum, they gave them ointments. They anointed them or whatever in oils. Okay, they basically took care of all of their needs. They then brought them to Jericho, and then they went back to Shema. Okay, so basically in that kind of war, there's less of a need for this kind of talk because in the end, it won't be a horrible, scary war. Right? So therefore, against your enemies we're talking about, because if you fall into their hands, they have no mercy. So now we're going to darshan all of these languages, all of these words, these phrases. Why in 4 ways? There's actually a very interesting debate about this Mishna. Is this Mishna saying, okay, we're going to darshan. Let me just read and then we'll see. Don't be nervous when you hear the stamping of the horses and the sharpening of the swords, right? Those noises scare you when you're about to go out to war. Al tiru, don't fear. What is this for? Mipnei hagafat trisim, the crashing of the shields one against the other. Vishivata kalgasim, and the noise of their boots on the ground. Okay, those are also noises that scare you. Al tichpezu mikol kranot, from the sounds of the shofar, right? Because people use these trumpets when they go out to war. Al ta'artzu mipnei kol tzvachot. Also, soldiers scream, we're coming on. Don't be scared of those noises. So now there's a big debate, which is a really interesting debate of when the kohen says this. Now, let's take bi'ur ma'asrot, if you remember. It says, this is what you're supposed to say. And we say exactly that text word for word. The question is, in the section that the Torah says, this is what the kohen is supposed to say. Does he say word for word what it says in the Torah? And then what's the Mishna doing here? The Mishna is just telling us, darshaning the words that the kohen says. When he says this word, he's referring to that. When he says that word, he's referring to that. Or is this the Mishna saying, the Torah said, say these words, but we're extrapolating them to mean say more than that. Say, don't be scared of the noise of the horses and don't be scared of this. And whether these words in the Mishna are actually included in the speech of the kohen, and it diverges a little bit from, again, he says everything it says in the psukim, but he adds more on. Or is the kohen supposed to say word for word what's in the Torah, and we're just kind of explaining this is what it really is referring to, but not that the kohen actually says these words. Interesting debate. Now we continue. Now, why should you not be scared? We're only at the beginning part of the speech, right? We're not going to get to the part about if you're scared, if you built a house and all that. Because God is walking before you. They're coming with their mighty humans, but you come with the glory of God. God is going to go out to battle for you. Here's some examples. Everybody knows the David and Goliath story. The Plishtim said, we're going to win because we have Goliath. They relied entirely on one human. In the end, he was killed by the sword. Wasn't it, right? He was killed by the rock. But and they fell with him. The Ammonites came with Shovach. Talk about Shovach later, but Shovach was a mercenary. Okay, he was hired by the Ammonim. He was from Aram, he was the head of the army of Hadad Ezel, and he basically, right? I don't think I have it. Yeah, Hadar Ezel. Sorry, he was Hadar Ezel of the Aramim, and he was hired by the Ammonim. Okay, so they came thinking he was going to do everything. They killed him in the end, and then everybody fell in battle to them. Okay, so thank you for saying it's written in both ways, Hadad Ezer and Hadar Ezer. Okay, Atem came, but you don't rely on humans like that. Because God is there. This is the Aaron. Okay, the Aaron is the representative of God that goes out to war, and you have God with you in war. So now the Gemara starts off with the very first thing, which is it's all in Hebrew. How do we know that? My kamar, how do you get it from there? Just because it says vidiber, that doesn't really help us. Remember before we darted in the word bikol from the kol anu aleviyim, bikol ram, the Levites and the brachot and kol, one of the proofs that it's only in Hebrew was from kol, that they learned from here. So also here we're going to learn from this statement of Moshe Yidaber. Moshe would speak and God would answer in bikol. Obviously that whole thing the receiving of the Torah was all done in Hebrew, therefore also here in Hebrew. So now this time, instead of the call, we're dashing the Vayidaber. So Mala'alam b'lashon kodesh, afka b'lashon kodesh, just like there it was in Hebrew, here also it's in Hebrew. Tanu Rabbanan, here was a braita, also going to expand on different issues about this, this kohen who's speaking to the people before war. B'nigasha kohen v'diber ala'am. Yachol kol kohen shiurtzeh. Maybe it's any kohen. Could be just whoever, whoever's around. Talmud lomar v'dibru hashotrim. Now we're going to understand why they said the officers. Ma shotrim b'mimuneh. How does shotrim become? How do they get to their job? They're not born into it like kohenim were born into it, but they're appointed. Ab kohen b'mimuneh. Therefore, this kohen who's called a shotel is basically, or he's called shotrim, really in plural, even though that's strange. But he must be someone who's appointed to the job. And kohenim were born into the job. So what appointed kohen would this be, if not a special kohen that was appointed for this job? Well, ema kohen gadol. Kohen gadol is also by appointment. Maybe it's the kohen gadol who does this, who was already appointed, right, for other things, but maybe he does this as well. They say no. Dumaya de shoter, it has to be like an officer. Ma shoter sheyesh memune al gabat. An officer always has another officer on top of them. There's a hierarchy. Af kohen sheyesh memune al gabat. So it has to be a kohen who has someone above him. The kohen gadol has nobody above him. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Kohen gadol nami ha'ika. Who's above the kohen gadol? Remember yesterday? Kohen gadol passes the Torah to the melech. The melech is above the kohen. Ha'ika melech al gabav. He does have someone above him. So they say, no. We mean ba'avodato kamar. We mean in his domain. In the temple, he is the head. So it's true. Outside the temple, there's a kohen, there's a king above him. But in his field, he's the top. We don't want someone like that. We want someone who's like a shotel, who has someone above him in his field. Ve'ema skan. So what about the skan, who's the appointed one underneath the kohen gadol? They say, skan lav mimunehu. He's not really considered an appointed person. Why? Detanya, he's not appointed to work because it says, Amar Rabbi Chanina skan kohanim. Notice who's speaking. Rabbi Chanina, who himself was the skan. Lema skan mimuneh, for what is he appointed? She'imi rabo psul b'kohen gadol nechnas l'mishamesh tachtav. He's only there as an underling in case something happens to the kohen gadol, but he's not appointed for any particular job, and therefore he's not really like a shoter. That's not what a shoter is. A shoter isn't just waiting for, for someone to leave their job and who's going to go in place. So from here, they learned it has to be someone who is appointed specifically for this job. I didn't mention before, but they call him a mashuach milchama. That means he was actually anointed with the Shema Yisrael. Okay, he was specially anointed for this job. Obviously, when there isn't the Shema Yisrael, which we learned after the first temple, there was no longer. So they have to kind of put him into his job in a different way. Some people say you can also count wearing the Shmona Begadim. He wears the Kohen Gadol's clothes, which is interesting because he's like a sort of Kohen Gadol. You might remember those who learned in the course for the skills class about the accidental murderer, that there was this whole thing when the Kohen Gadol dies, that's when the accidental murderer gets to leave the refuge city. And there was a debate, is it also include the Mashuach Milchama or not? Okay, because he is a type of sort of like a Kohen Gadol. Va'amar alehem Shema Yisrael. And then he says to them here, Israel. Mishna Shema Yisrael. Why does he use that language? Obviously, we all know the word Shema Yisrael can draw up in our head. Shema. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Amar lam Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. What he's basically saying to them is the following: Afilu lo kiyantam ela kriyat Shema shacharit v'arvit iatem nimsarim biyadam. Even if all you did was Shema in the morning and Shema at night, which is really a reference to this very famous machloket about limud Torah, Talmud Torah every day. You have to learn every day. According to one opinion, it's enough to say Shema in the morning and Shema at night, and you fulfill your mitzvah of learning. And so here it's saying how learning Torah is what brings God to save you, but even the minimum requirement is sufficient. So it's a reminder to the people of, yes, God is going with you, but God is going with you because you have merits of, and particularly we're going to see the centrality in the sugya in another place as well, of learning Torah. And again, because we're talking about the rabbis and we're talking about this was their world, to them learning Torah was the highest, the most important thing. And therefore, if you've done at least your minimum, that will protect you. So quoting those words from the Pasuk and from the Mishna, right? Don't be scared, don't be weak of heart, and don't be scared. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we see there's two separate times. These two speeches are not two parts of one big speech. They're two separate speeches. Echad bisfal, one is when they're on the border about to leave Israel toward the war, but not engaging in the battle yet, they're on their way. Ve'echad b'milchama, and one as they're really at war. Which is which? Well, bisfal mahu omer. What do we do on the border? Shim'u divrei marachot. Now we're on Amud Bet. Shim'u divrei marachei milchama v'chizru. Okay, it's all the part about who's supposed to go out to war. It's actually interesting. This is out of order. The second part, notice the Torah order is, don't be scared. God is with you. Second part is, if you did this, you go home. If you do this, you go home. Well, logically, that would come first, because you're not going to leave the country to go out to war if you're not supposed to go out to war. So first he tells them, right, don't do that. And the second thing is, when are you the most scared? When the war is facing you face to face. And that's when you need the pep talk of, don't be scared. So first they say the second speech first, and then v'chazru, and then b'milchama ma'hu omer, when you're actually at the battle site, what do we say? Al yirach levavchem, al tiru, al tachzu, al taratzu. And why four? Kineged arba'at dvarim she'umot ha'olam osim. It's against the four things that the nations do, which is migifim u'miri'im sofchim v'romsim. Okay, they clash their weapons together, they blow on trumpets or shofarot. Sovchim, they scream, and romsim, and they trample. So against those four things, that's what the four statements are for. Now we're going to again have a whole slew of drashot on the story of Goliath, do what we've done already a few times in this Masechet, most prominently in the beginning of the Masechet when we have the stories of Shimshon and the story of Avshalom and all that, and try to understand what this person did that was so bad. Why were they punished? We'll see also midah keneged midah, where the punishment fits the crime. So first we're going to darshan Goliath's name. Goliath, he stood with kind of a brazenness against God, like up against God. How do we know he stood up against God? Well, he said, choose a person who will come down. Remember, Goliath stood there with all of his might and all of his everything, his armor, and you have a whole long description of it, which we'll talk about also later. And he says, choose one person, right? He'll fight against me, anybody. I'll fight anyone. But what is Ish? Ish is a reference to God. How do we know? Ain't Ish ala kadosh baruch hu. What he basically was saying is, I'm ready to fight against God. Shenemal Hashem Ish Milchama. In Shirat Hayam, we have God as a man of war. So there you see, God is referred to as a man. He was actually talking directly to God, and that's why he's called Goliath. He's begiloi panim, without anything hidden, just right up against God. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So what did God say as a reaction? He wanted an Ish. I'm going to put him in the hands of a son, someone who's called the son of an Ish. Who's that? David ben Ish Efrati. They're connecting between the David ben Ish and the Ish that Goliath requested. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Meir. B'shlosha mekomot lechadu piv lo'oto rasha. Three statements that Goliath made, where basically he tripped himself up. He said something that was supposed to be showing a sign of strength, but it was actually a foreshadowing of what was going to happen and what was going to bring his demise. Echad, one of them is the pasuk we just said. B'ru lachem ish v'yered elai. Now, elai means he'll come down to me, but if you change the aleph in elai and you switch it to an ayin, yered alai means he will come down on top of me, which means he'll destroy me. V'idach im yuchal yilachem miti v'hikani. Right, let's see, if he can fight against me and will hit me. That was a reference to the fact that he will get hit in the end. V'idach dekamar leDavid hakelev anochi, or my dog ki ata ba elai b'maklot, that you're coming against me with sticks. So what does he say here? Again, elai is alai, on me, as opposed to, right, you're going to come on me with sticks and not at me. David nami amam. So now they say, wait, you're going to translate elai as alai and basically say that Goliath foreshadowed what was going to happen to him. Also David. What did David say? Amar le, ata ba elai b'cherev u'b'chanitu b'chidon. You're coming to me with a sword, with a chanit is another type of sword, and a kidon. No, it was a javelin. So Hadran, they say, no, that's not a spear, thank you. So you come with a sword, a spear, or a javelin. So again, you could say you're coming on me with a sword, a spear, meaning you'll attack me, and meaning a foreshadowing of his demise. But that's not the way we understand that pasuk. We say, no, well, that's because Hadar Amar le. Just one second. What's the aleph? Can I find it? I lost here. Aleph, Hadar Amar, Spot, Yisrael. Okay, without the word Yisrael, that's why. Okay. So Hadar Amar le va'anochi ba'alecha b'shem Hashem tzvaot Elohei ma'archot Yisrael asher charafta. Because then he says to him, it's not, he doesn't just say, you're going to come against me, but he says, but I come to you in the name of Hashem, the head of the one organizing this battle that we're organizing the Jews that you charafta, that you desecrated. So since David has a continuing sense to that, we don't have to understand it in that way. And we could still understand Goliath in that way, that he was foreshadowing his own demise. We're now going to go back to another theme before, the importance of Limud Torah. So he comes early in the morning, and from early in the morning till late in the evening. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, right? What else is said early in the morning and late in the evening? That's Shacharit, that's Kriyat Shema. So he was trying to get them, right? We're going to basically say this was a religious war. He was trying to get us to stop learning Torah. Again, learning Torah was the central thing. If he can get us to stop learning Torah, that will be the end of us. And Vayityatzeiv 40 yom, how long was he standing there against the Jewish people? For 40 days, obviously reference to the 40 days on Har Sinai. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kineged 40 yom, shenitzna behem Torah, against the 40 days where they received the Torah. So again, he was trying to get them to undo what they had done. Some people say that because the giving of the Torah was delayed by 40 days because of our sin, so because of that, we were punished by the 40 days here. I'm going to read the whole pasuk, or at least part of it, because we're going to darshan these parts. It says, so ish habeinayim, this, whatever, we're going to have to explain what is beinayim. Beinayim means middle usually, or something like that. So what does this mean, beinayim? From the machanot plishtim, Goliath shmo migat. Okay, his name is Goliath. He's from Gat. Govho shesh amot v'zeret. Okay, and then it starts talking about his height. He was really, really tall. So my benayim amarav shemevuneh mikol mum. He was built perfectly. He had no blemishes. Ushmuel amar benoni shebe'echad. He was the middle of his brothers. So there's two ways to understand this. One is to say he was this giant, but guess what? He was a giant among other brothers. He was the middle. He wasn't even the strongest. But all of the other explanations, we're going to have a whole bunch of explanations of benayim, seem to show it means he was very, very strong or very powerful or something along those lines. So some people say benoni shebe'echad means he was the central one, middle meaning central one of all of his brothers. It was a sign of strength. Debei Rabbi Shila amar shu asoy kibinyan. He was built like a building, right? A human is not usually built like a building. He was solid. Rabbi Yochanan amar bar mea pape v'chad nani. And this is going to start a whole other theme. He was the son of 100 pape, 100 fathers and one mother, nani. Okay, papi comes from the Greek papas. So he was basically, his mother slept around with a lot of people. He didn't even know who his father was. And then, right, one of the best insults people like to give to people is, right, we use the word ben zonah, right, son of, a way of saying this is, right, your mother slept around. It's a huge insult. V'Goliath shmo migat, so darshaning the continuation, also in the same vein. Tane Rav Yosef, he explained, Sha'kol dashim et imo kigat. They all trampled on the mother like you trample on the grapes in the gat, which is where you make the wine. Tiv ma'arot uchlinan ma'arachot. The Torah says that he came from the ma'arot lishtim, but it's written as the ma'arachot. Sorry, it says I say habeinayim. No, what is it? Ma'arot. Yeah, he's from ma'arachot plishtim. Okay, so like the lines of the plishtim, but it's read as ma'arachot, but it's written as ma'arot. What is ma'arot? Tani Rav Yosef shakol he'eru be'imo. The he'erot is to go inside in a sexual manner, so they all went inside his mother. Tiv Harafa. Okay, now we're talking about this is the sons of. We're going to talk about his mother. Okay, Harafa is what his mother's name was. Uktiv Orpah. Okay, so again, it says Harafa, but it's written Orpah. Ravu Shmuel Chanama Harafa Shma. Lamanikha Shma Orpah. The question is, which is her real name? Right, Harafa they say is Orpah. Which is her real name? Which is, in other words, in some places, this isn't the Kriyukti. This is in one place it calls her Harafa, in another place it calls her Orpah. We're going to say these are one and the same person. And either one is the real name and one is the name to be darshan. So which one? So one said Harafa is her real name. Why is she called Orpah? Again, the idea of sexual relations. They all kind of had sex with her from behind. They all trample upon her like the groats. Okay, like the groats are the grains of wheat that they crush. How do we know harifot? That's what it means. The groats. And then she put on it the groats. Some people say from here, this is a pasuk. I assume it's in Mishle. It's a Mishle type pasuk. I didn't check. Yes, it's in Mishle. If you take an avil, a foolish person, Mishle, they're always against foolish people. You take a foolish person and you put them in the mortar and you crush it. Betoch harifot be'eli, and you put it with the kernels of grain of the wheat there that you're going to crush. You can't crush out and take out the avil, right? The avil, the foolishness in them. In other words, try, but it's not going to come out of them. When a foolish person is always going to be foolish, basically. So these are just ways of showing the root of harifot is these growths. Okay, these are the four that were born to. This is a pasuk to Harafa in Gat. So who are they? Minding who are they? Amar Apchista, Safu, Madon, Goliath, Yishbi Beno. Okay, these are the four. But right? This is Saf, Madon, Goliath, Yishbi. Yishbi was in Nov, so they just attributed to where he was. Why did they specifically, her four children fall in the hands of David? So this we learn from the book of Ruth. It's Orpah is all right. They're connecting. I didn't say this, but they're connected between Orpah, who was the sister-in-law of Ruth, who leaves Naomi behind. Remember, Naomi says, I'm going back to Israel, and you women should stay here. And Ruth decides to go with her, and Orpah turns her back. It's also why she's called Orpah, because she shows Naomi the back of her neck. So now it says, Vatishak Orpah lachamuta, she kisses her mother-in-law, Ruth davka ba, and Ruth stuck with her. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So God said at that moment, again, midah keneged midah, yavo b'nei neshuka v'yiplu b'yad b'nei advuka. The one who kissed and walked away, turned her back, will fall in the hands of the grandchildren of Ruth, right? The one who stuck with her. Darash Rabban. Now, in that pasuk, the psukim there also say first that they cried. Both women cried before this happened, and then Orpah kisses her and Ruth stays with her. So Darash Rava Bischar Arba Dmaot Sholida Orpah Chamota. She did cry, and according to this tradition, she cried 4 tears. She shed 4 tears. Zachtavi Yatsumi Mena Arba'a Giborim. She ended up having these 4 very strong sons. That was her reward. That's the pasuk where it says they cried. Tiv Chetz Chanito, back to Goliath. It says Chetz Chanito. Viklinan Etz Chanito. Again, a kriyuch tiv, where it's written one way but pronounced a different way. It's read as Etz Chanito. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Adayin Lohi. So why does it say Chetz when it doesn't mean Chetz? Okay, so what's Chetz? Chetz is also Chetzi, half. Adayin Lohiganu Lechatzi Shipcho Shelo Torasha. All those descriptions of Goliath, you might remember this from the Torah, how grand and mighty he was. It's not even half of his praises. Why? From here you learn, you can't praise bad people too much. And that's why we held back a lot of the praise. Below liftach beklal, so then why are we telling it at all? And if you're not supposed to praise a wicked person, then why did we say all these praises about Goliath? Obviously, David. We wanted to show how great David was, that he was able to go against this huge, this mighty person, mighty warrior, and fight against him. And that's why we had to use this description, but it wasn't even half of his praises. Now we're going to move to Bnei Ammon, Shovach. I'm going to talk about this character, Shovach, who sometimes is mentioned as Shovach and sometimes as Shofach. Okay, so again, Tiv Shovach, Uktiv Shofach. Okay, I believe it's in Divrei Yamim. Yeah, in Divrei Yamim he's called Shofach, and in Shmuel he's called Shovach. Rabu Shmuel, Chanamar Shofach Shmuel. His name was really Shofach. So Lamani Kashmo Shovach. Again, we're going to have to say one was a drasha name. Shasui Kishovach. Shovach or the dovecotes. They're very high up. So he was very tall. He was like a dovecote. The Chanamar Shovach Shmo, Lamani Kashmo Shofach. Anyone who sees him would melt before him and kind of pour out, meaning kind of fall flat, like water that comes out of the pot. So since we're darshaning these psukim in two different ways, we're now going to darshan another pasuk, a few other psukim. This one is about Nebuchadnezzar, and again, his strength. So it describes Nebuchadnezzar, and it says, Ashpato kekever patuach kulam giborim. It's not really clear what this means, right? His ashpa, which often means garbage here, it doesn't mean garbage, it means maybe his weapons are like an open grave, all are strong. Or maybe his people that are with him, his quiver, they say. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Chanamar b'sha'ash zorkim chetz osim ashpatot shel chaladim. As soon as they would shoot an arrow, it would create mounds and mounds of piles and piles of dead bodies. And why does it say giborim? Kulam giborim, they're all very strong. Shema tomal she'umanim b'krav. Maybe you might say, maybe they just have a good shot, but they're not really strong. They want you to know that they're also very strong. This is a whole different explanation. When they go to the bathroom, they make piles and piles of feces, okay? Which means these are, right, you ever see, I've had people at my table, right, when they're in training and they eat a ton of food, right? So if you eat a ton of food, you're going to have a ton of waste. So they must have, really strong guys, big guys, eat a lot of food, have a lot of waste. Now, there's two reasons why you could have a lot of waste. It could be because you're sick, because maybe they have stomach problems. So that you don't say that kulam giborim. They're all trying to explain why. If they already say ashpatot, why do they have to explain kulam giborim? So this explains so that you don't think that they're sick. To which the Gemara goes up and says, well, this means that normally, if you have a lot of feces, it's a sign that you're sick. To which the Gemara says, why are you telling us this? What do we need to know this for? So it says, litrach benafshe. Well, go to a doctor, go take care of it. In other words, this is a good sign that you have something you need to deal with. Interesting aside. Okay, back to our topic, although kind of a little bit similar. The last pasuk we're going to darshan for today, here we'll end. Okay, here's a pasuk that if you have worry, this is the pasuk of Mishle, if you have worry in your heart, yashchenu. Now, try to darshan, what is yashchenu? So again, we're going to have two options to explain. And this is why it's here, because it's in this slew of psukim that we have two options to explain. And it's a little similar to the last part, which is you seem to have a problem, go deal with it. Right there, it was a physical problem. Here, it's going to be an emotional problem. When you have a lot of worries, what do? Very interesting machloket. I really always remember this. Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi. Chanamar yasichenu midato. They're both going to darshan. The shin is a sin. Sin sometimes also switches with a samach. Okay, so yasichenu midato is, it says with the sin here, but it means with the samach. Lasiach dato is get your mind off of it. When you're worried about something, get your mind off of it and think about something else. V'chanamal yasichena la'acherim. Milashon siach, conversation, talk it out. These are classic two different approaches, and it really matches kind of who the person is. Whether you have a problem, you like to talk it out, you want to flesh it through, it helps you. Some people, you're just better off not thinking about it and getting distracted from it. So these are two kind of models, right? Clearly psychological analysis of, how do you deal with problems? What's the best way to do it? These are two different approaches, but again, the different approaches might work better for different people. Okay. Let's just, and this is, by the way, interesting. It's here. Why? Because we're talking about being worried about milchama. What do you, right? Either distract yourself and just get involved in dealing with what you're doing right now and put those thoughts out of your mind, or maybe talk it out. Maybe that's why the kohen is saying it, right? To talk it out, to kind of make it feel better. Okay, quick review of our daf. We started with finishing up the section about flattery and how bad flattery is. Then we moved on to the Mishloach milchama, to this whole showed them where the kohen gets up and he makes this big speech, which we now learned is actually two speeches and actually in a different order than it appears in the Torah. First, he tells everybody to go home. And then at the later point, when they're actually with the war in front of them, he says, don't be fearful. And why all the languages of don't be fearful. And we learned it has to be in Hebrew. We got that from Daber. Then we had, he has to be an appointed person. We learned that from the Shotrim. Then because it mentioned Goliath, as opposed to, right, they rely on humans and we rely on God. Then it brought the whole Goliath story, and we darshaned his name. We darshaned the ways he kind of foreshadowed his own demise. And then he was trying to get us to leave Torah, right? And the Torah is the key to survival and winning these battles. Then we connected between Orpah, his mother, and Harafa, that they're really one and the same. His mother, who's listed as Harafa, is also Orpah, and why she was punished because she turned away from Ruth, and that were Naomi, and that's why Ruth, in the end, who stuck with Naomi, her sons end up killing her things, although she was rewarded that she had these strong sons because she did cry. And then we dealt with the Shovach, and then we dealt with this other psukim that could be understood in two different manners. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day.